Samwell Tarly took one last look over his shoulder at the citadel's towering spire. Clouds heavy with the promise of winter pressed low upon Old Town, draping the ancient harbor in a hush. The city's bustle sounded distant now, as if the swirling harbor gulls and bawling merchants had receded to a remote corner of his mind. He clenched his hands together, noticing the dryness of his knuckles, a subtle remainder of all the nights he had spent leafing through brittle manuscripts in the vaults below the library. One might think the Citadel's labyrinth of archives would bring clarity, but Sam felt only the gathering confusion in his chest. Here he stood at the threshold of departure, a small trunk by his side filled with rubbed parchment, charcoal scratchings, and a single old volume wrapped in cloth. That cloth was the color of dull gold, stashed away at the bottom of a hidden section among the annals of Targaryen lineage. The battered, unassuming book had first caught his eye 2 weeks earlier. It had a cover half-eaten by mold, its spine flaking with age, and within it, Sam had discovered something that expanded his sense of the world. Or perhaps twisted was the better word, for the knowledge left him dizzy, questioning half the lessons he had gleaned since arriving at the Citadel. He could barely admit this final chapter of his education to anyone. Who would believe it? Sam, the self-styled maester who had only begun to delve into the deeper mysteries, stumbling upon ancient references to hidden ruins in the far north. Of course, he had known about Dragonglass. Dragonstone was famed for it, and so was the Isle of Skagos and the mountains east of the Frostfangs beyond the wall. But this old tome told of more than just the presence of the volcanic glass. It spoke of forges, of workshops hidden in lost places, and it hinted that such forges were not built by the children of the forest or even the first men alone. The words were an uneasy whisper that claimed Valyrians, exiles or pioneers from across the sea, may have once established a settlement near the shivering sea, high in the untamed, frozen north. The idea was monstrous. Valyria was a place of legends, destroyed long centuries past by the doom. No one from that shattered empire had ever been known to settle so far west, let alone in the northern wastes. But the battered tome, half in the archaic dialect of the Undulls and half in High Valyrian, told a story. Or part of a story, anyway, for many pages were missing. What little remained spoke of an expedition that had fled the Dragon Lord's cruelty, gone north by ship, discovered a deposit of obsidian, and used it not just as a resource for arms, but for something more peculiar. Most tantalizing of all was a repeated phrase, the blood scythe forges. It spoke of forging by black fire, and the forging of hearts of obsidian. The references were maddeningly vague. Sam had whispered it all to Gilly 3 nights ago, after finishing the last page of the book. She had blinked at him, uncertain, but eventually urged him to do what he felt was right. So Sam, mustering the kind of courage that never came easy to him, decided that the truth demanded more than reading. It demanded discovery. Hadn't he always wanted to be a man of learning, who uncovered hidden knowledge for the greater good? A day later, Sam presented his request to Archmaester Ebrose, a mild man with watery eyes who often smelled of dust and dried herbs. The Archmaester had listened, trembling the chain at his neck. He had dismissed Sam's speculation with a condescending chuckle, but gave no direct denial to Sam's request for further study. A Valyrian outpost beyond the neck? Ebrose repeated. Absurd. The 9 free cities, Dragonstone, mainland Essos, these were the known footprints of the Valyrian freehold before the doom. The legends of their presence in Westeros revolve around House Targaryen and precious few families rumored to have Dragonlord blood. Beyond that, pure fancy. But Sam, determined, pressed on. Valyria's history is full of contrariness. Ebrose. So many families of the old blood vanished in the cataclysm. Who's to say none journeyed to strange corners? We all know of the scattered enclaves of the Rhoynar who survived the wars in Essos and found their way here. There are so many old tales. And perhaps old tales they should remain, the Archmaester had snapped gently. Then Ebrose's tone softened. Though if you insist on going north again, Tarly, be sure you're prepared. Don't go chasing illusions in the cold. He left Sam with that warning and an indulgent wave of his hand. The next morning, Sam gathered his meager supplies, the newly discovered tome, and a few other suspicious texts that might lend hints. That same day, he found a friendly ship captain named Joran Pike who agreed to take him as far as Eastwatch by the Sea on the promise of coin to be paid from Lord Commander Ed Tollett's funds. If Sam could confirm that the watch needed more ravens, which was always half true. Sam parted from Gilly and little Sam with a heavy heart, but she offered her blessing. "Bring us knowledge we can use," she said, pressing her hand to his cheek. "We have to survive." And so Sam came to stand by the ship's railing the morning of his departure. He watched Old Town shrink behind him. The gulls wheeled overhead, their cries growing ever fainter as the ship glided into the deeper waters. He half expected something, some maester or other, to rush out onto the docks waving a contradictory text. "Wait, Tarly!" It was all a forgery, but no such rescue came. He was alone with his convictions, and with the battered cloth-wrapped volume locked in his trunk. He wondered, for the 100th time since reading it, if it was all nonsense. If so, he would find only ice and emptiness and not a trace of Valyrian stone. But the thought that it might hold truth awoke a strange sensation in him, a sense of responsibility. If this was real, if somehow lost Valyrians had discovered ways to manipulate Dragonglass in the north, or left behind knowledge that might prove the difference in the wars to come, how could he not chase the lead? Yet his stomach churned as the horizon opened wide. Old Town was so far from the biting cold, and the north, especially beyond the wall, was no place for a coward. Sam whispered under his breath, "I'm not the same as I was." He tried to believe it, no matter how many times fear rose in his throat. He had endured so much: White Walkers, Whites, Craster's Keep. He reminded himself he had survived and grown. He occupied his time on the ship rereading the old volume when the weather permitted. Joran's ship was a battered cog that smelled of fish, its sails patched from ragged adventures. The crew teased Sam gently, calling him Maester Mist, because he constantly disappeared below to read. He ate salted cod and stale bread, sipped watery ale, and endured restless nights in a hammock that creaked like a complaining ghost. Outside, the summer storms battered the sea, and Sam discovered new ways to be seasick. At last, after many days of slow progress, the ship turned the corner of Westeros and aimed for the Bay of Seals. Here the air was sharper, stinging Sam's cheeks whenever he stood on deck. Days blurred together in a swirl of drizzle, wind, and the rhythmic slap of sails. Sam dreamt of ghostly halls glimmering with obsidian pillars. He dreamt of forging hammers that rang with a music unlike any blacksmith's anvil, forging weapons that sizzled with bright power. But in his dream, the forging produced not swords, but hearts, pulsing lumps of black glass that threatened to come alive. He would wake with a jolt, his heart hammering, and find only the cramped gloom of the cabin. By the time they reached Eastwatch by the Sea, the sky was a sullen gray and a soft snow drifted down. Winter had not arrived in its fullness, but its early teeth were setting in. The watchers at the fortress recognized Sam, though they were surprised to see him. They hustled him inside and peppered him with questions. Has the Citadel discovered some secret? Are the lords ready for the next battle? All Sam could say was that he was here on the Lord Commander's permission. Dolorous Ed was still the Lord Commander, after all. Ed Tollett had a gloom about him that never quite lifted, but he greeted Sam with a grin so faint that it could have been a trick of the light. "Back again, Sam? Don't tell me you missed the chilly air." Sam mustered a laugh. "I missed the library, my lord." "We don't have a library." "Indeed," Sam admitted with a small cough. "But I do hope to scour the old ledgers and maybe glean some knowledge from the men of the watch. I found something in Old Town that suggests, well," Ed let out a sigh. "Something unusual, I'm sure." "We live in unusual times, my friend. Stay as long as you need, but keep to your bunk. We've new recruits who might pester you for stories." He paused, then nodded. "Glad you're here." Sam smiled at the unexpected warmth in Ed's voice. Eastwatch's gloom, the swirl of flurries, the creaking wooden stairs. Somehow, he felt a sense of belonging in this hodgepodge place. The men working at the walls greeted him with nods. They saw him as Sam the Slayer, Sam the Maester, Sam who had survived. It was a label that still made him blush, but at the same time, it lent him a sort of respect. He found a small alcove off the main hall to store his trunk. There, by a lonely hearth, Sam began reading in earnest. The battered volume was written partly by an unknown scribe. That scribe had tried to translate ancient High Valyrian fragments into Westerosi tongue, with varying success. Sam recognized that many sections were missing or guessed at, yet certain passages were clear enough to loom in his mind. References to an expedition that sailed west from Valyria, commanded by a lesser scion of one of the Freehold's proud families. They traveled north, the pages said, for reasons uncertain. Either they were exiled for heresy or they fled tyranny from a more powerful rival. Something drove them across the seas, beyond Dragonstone, beyond the roiling currents, until they found a land of cold. The text described an unforgiving coast battered by storms, near mountainous crags. Sam cross-referenced the details with known geographies. He started suspecting it might be somewhere near the Shivering Sea, perhaps east or northeast of the Vale, or even further up beyond the peninsula of Skagos. The text was not precise. Then a single line grabbed his attention anew. They found black stone in the belly of the ice mountains, and they forged wonders. Then the Watchers of Ice came, and the old horrors awakened. But by the black fire, the Watchers were stayed. The Watchers of Ice. Sam read it 3 times. It could be a reference to the others, White Walkers, though it wasn't certain. The old horrors awakened line made him shiver. And by the black fire, the Watchers were stayed, implied they had used Dragonglass or some other forging technique to fend off the threat. Another line, half faded, mentioned the forging of the scythe, cutting the swirling darkness, naming hearts anew. The imagery was cryptic, but it made Sam's imagination churn. Could it be that these Valyrians discovered a method to fight the White Walkers ages before House Targaryen even came to Westeros? It seemed impossible, or it seemed too important to ignore. He spoke with some men in Eastwatch, those who had ventured with rangers beyond the wall. Most had never heard of any such settlement, but one old ranger named Guthrie had a memory of passing by an outcropping of peculiar black rock near the frozen shore, far north. But he said it was just a mass of volcanic stone. No sign of buildings, though, Guthrie muttered. Nothing but gulls, snow, and the wind trying to freeze your bones. With a frustrated sigh, Sam recognized that any serious search might require him to go beyond the wall again, or even pass beyond the usual paths. He wrote a raven letter to Jon, who was then serving in Winterfell as far as Sam knew, explaining that he had uncovered something potentially important about Dragonglass in the far north. He also wrote to the Citadel, stating that he was pursuing an old lead regarding the history of obsidian in Westeros. Then he waited. Weeks passed, and winter's early grip tightened. Ice formed in the crannies around Eastwatch's walls, and the cold wind stiffened sails. The sun rose late and set early in a haze of silver. Sam's hopes for a quick expedition began to wane. Yet the battered text would not let him go. He scoured the Watch's store of old logs for any mention of unusual ruins discovered near the Shivering Sea. He found only scattered references to hidden coves, basalt cliffs, once or twice a mention of dark shards that might be obsidian. But there was also an ancient text from a ranger's journal, dating back nearly 5 centuries, which recounted the discovery of a ruin like black spikes rising from the snow, presumably collapsed walls or towers made of some black stone. The ranger had called it a castle built by devils, but no one had believed him. He also wrote that a small group of survivors from Hardhome had spoken of seeing dark shapes in the distance around the same region, as if cursed monuments lurked there. The ranger's text ended abruptly with no further explanation. One night, Sam sat in the flickering hearthlight in his alcove, reading that ranger's words over and over, trying to link them to the battered volume's references. He felt he was on the cusp of something. A hidden city? A fortress? If so, it might be lost to time or half buried in ice. He pressed his palm against his eyes, exhaustion gnawing at him. But an inner voice insisted that if he truly wanted knowledge, he had to go see for himself. He approached Ed Tollett the following morning, breath puffing in the cold. "My Lord Commander, I need a small party to go north. On a journey of discovery, you might say. I suspect there's something beyond the eastern stretches. The Lord Commander looked at him as if Sam had declared he wanted to roast coffee beans on the wall. Sam, we can't spare many men. The wildlings are a question mark. The undead threat could rise at any time, though it's been quiet. We should remain vigilant. Sam nodded. I know, and that's precisely why I must go. If there is some store of dragonglass or knowledge of forging it, we need that. We both know that the whites remain a menace. The others may re-emerge. He paused. If the rumors in these texts hold any kernel of truth, it might be the key to forging better weapons. Something beyond ordinary dragon steel. We can't let that lie dormant. Ed pinched the bridge of his nose. I've known you too long to talk you out of this. You want me to spare a few men? Maybe 2 or 3. You won't have an army, Tarly. That's all I ask. 2 or 3 men, hopefully ones who know the land. And some supplies, a few mules, or at least enough food. I will do this alone if I must, but I'd prefer not to. Ed grunted, shaking his head in reluctant acceptance. All right, you'll take Ronald, Jarek, and Garth. All ex-rangers, though they are not the best of the best. They'll do if you can talk them into it. And a single horse. We've no mules to spare, but you might pick up an old donkey from the wildling camp if they'll let you. Thank you, Sam said, exhaling with relief. I truly believe this is important. Just come back, Ed said, preferably alive. I don't want to have to write to Gilly about burying your body in an ice cave. Sam forced a smile, but the thought chilled him. All his old fears threatened to swirl back. But that night, he found Garth and Ronald by the mess hall's fire. Over a supper of stew that was half ice by the time it reached their tin bowls, Sam laid out his plan. He tried to keep it simple. They were searching for an old ruin that might hold knowledge about forging dragonglass. He didn't say ancient Valyrians, because he doubted they would believe him. Ronald was a tall, quiet man, once a poacher. He listened with a furrowed brow. So, we go north, find some old black castle, rummage for precious shards, and come back? That it? Sam nodded. Yes, if we're lucky. Jarek, by contrast, was a round-faced fellow with a quick grin. I've scouted near Hardhome once. You planning to go that far? The place is cursed, you know? Sam tried to keep calm. We won't go to Hardhome if we can help it. We'll be traveling further east, perhaps along the coast. There's supposed to be an old path that curves around the coast, though it might be half-blocked by ice. Garth, who was older, with streaks of white in his beard, stared into the fire. I've seen worse. If it helps the realm, I'll go. Not sure what we'll find, though. Sam felt a surge of gratitude. He smiled at them, though he feared he might be leading them into a fool's errand. Still, they had accepted. That was more than he had hoped for. Within 3 days, they departed. The morning was grim and windy. The sea battered the rocky shore below Eastwatch, and Sam's breath billowed in clouds as he loaded supplies onto the donkey he had managed to barter from a wildling fisherman. The donkey's eyes were dull, and it seemed to quake almost as much as Sam. But the men were stoic, furs wrapped tight, leading a single horse. Ronald carried a bow and a quiver of black-feathered arrows. Garth had a broadsword, Jarek a wicked-looking hunting spear. Sam clutched his staff, the one he had carried beyond the wall before, and also had a short sword at his belt, though he scarcely trusted himself to use it. His trunk was left behind. Sam only took the battered volume, carefully wrapped in waxed cloth, secured in his saddlebag. They set out east along the coast, the vast sea to their right, the towering heights of the wall many leagues behind them. Once they left the shadows of the wall, the wind seemed sharper, slicing under their cloaks. The terrain was rugged, rocky outcroppings, patches of stunted trees, drifts of snow. Sam's donkey stumbled often, but they made steady progress. There were no paved roads here, just faint tracks occasionally used by wildlings. But after a couple of days, even those tracks became lost in wind-blown tundra. At night, they huddled together around meager fires. Sam used lumps of peat or driftwood from the beach. The nights felt endless, the darkness pressing in. Sam often dreamt of the Black Fortress again, only now it was wreathed in icy wind. The clang of forging hammered through the dream, an eerie resonance that echoed in his ears. One time he woke and saw Garth watching him with concern, perhaps overhearing Sam's muttered words in his sleep. On the 5th day, they encountered a party of wildlings. About a dozen men, accompanied by a few women and children. They were scraping by, gathering shellfish along the rocky shoreline. The watchmen approached cautiously, though Sam tried to remember how John had taught him to greet free folk without condescension. "We mean no harm," Sam said. "We're on a quest searching for old stone. Do you know of any black ruins along the coast?" They looked at him skeptically. One older wildling with braids said he had heard stories from his grandfather about black towers far to the east, but most said it was a cursed place, haunted by pale shadows. "The Watchers roam there," he said. "We keep away." Another spat and said, "You're mad, Crow." Still, they traded a small piece of dried fish in exchange for a half-flask of cheap ale. Sam gleaned from them that beyond a certain headland was a region they called the Frozen Spines, where basalt columns rose from the sea. Ships seldom sailed that far because of unpredictable ice flows. The entire place was rumored to be a haunt of the dead. Sam's heart quickened. Could that be the clue he needed? He repeated the phrase in his mind. Black spines. This matched the ranger's old account of black spikes rising from the snow. The next morning, they continued east. The land grew wilder, with steep cliffs and narrow inlets. Twice they had to backtrack and find safer passages. The donkey struggled, braying in protest at every icy slope. Ronald and Jarek took turns guiding it, while Sam panted, face numb, stinging from the wind. His old, ill-fitted black cloak was threadbare now, and the new furs he wore were not quite enough. Every step was a battle. But on the 8th day, as they came around a ridge battered by the wind, Sam saw something that made him stop in his tracks. Out on the horizon, partially obscured by swirling snow, were shapes. Jutting from a distant slope, beyond a wide inlet and a narrow spit of land, rose several tall rock formations as black as midnight. They could have been natural basalt pillars. But in the unsettled swirl of snow and gloom, Sam imagined them as the broken towers of a fortress. The donkey brayed again, as if it too saw something ominous. They took a moment to rest. Ronald squinted. That's likely the basalt columns. Could be just a natural formation. Could be, Sam murmured. Yet a quiet voice in him insisted it was more. They made camp early, deciding to approach by daylight with some caution. Sam's stomach churned with anticipation. He rubbed his face, tried to calm the tremor in his chest. He thought over and over of the battered volume. They found black stone in the belly of the ice mountains. This might be it. He shivered. He half wished he were back in Old Town, warm among the stacks of books. But he was here on the threshold of something momentous. The vow he had made to serve the realm urged him forward. That night, the wind picked up fiercely, forcing them to shelter behind a rocky outcrop. The donkey bleated in misery. Sam hardly slept, for the howling gale seemed to carry voices. Half delirious, he thought he heard the ring of hammers. Once or twice, he peered into the swirling darkness, convinced a tall shape was standing out there. But it was only the wind. By dawn, the wind eased enough that they could break camp. They wrapped their bedrolls around the donkey to keep it from freezing, then pressed on. The approach was treacherous, the rocky ground slippery with ice. In some places, they had to creep down slopes of scree, half-crawling to keep their footing. But as they neared the black spines, Sam began to see structure. Angles that seemed too regular to be natural. A wedge of black stone shaped like a collapsed wall. A corner that jutted from the snow in a near right angle. Ronald's eyes flickered with uncertainty, as if he too recognized the signs of a man-made structure. Jarek whistled softly. "Look at that." He pointed to a portion of black stone rising from the ground. There, faint but unmistakable, were markings carved into the surface. Straight lines, whorls, reminiscent of old Valyrian glyphs. Ice crusted the edges, making them faint, but Sam approached, heart pounding, to brush away some frost. He revealed a swirl pattern that repeated 3 times. In High Valyrian script, if Sam was not mistaken, it was an old sign meaning bond or fused. Garth muttered, "This is old. Gods, I never imagined anything like it." Sam struggled to breathe in the cold air. This was it. An actual ruin, partially collapsed, perhaps once a fortress. The battered text had not lied. Once he gathered himself, he said, "Let's see if there's an entrance or anything resembling a courtyard." Took them hours to explore the perimeter. Most of the black spines were actually sections of collapsed wall or towers, heavily eroded, buried in centuries of snow and ice. They found chunks of obsidian fused with another dark stone. Sam recognized signs of Valyrian craft, where the stone seemed melted or fused in ways Westerosi stonemasons never used. Much was broken beyond recognition, but here and there they found squared-off corridors, doorways that opened into darkness filled with drifting snow. The place was large enough to have been a significant outpost, if not an entire fortress. The donkey refused to advance past the perimeter, no matter how much they coaxed it. So they left the animal tethered by a small stand of scraggly pines, along with the horse, and proceeded on foot. Each step crunched on crusted ice, reverberating in the silent gloom. Sam felt as if the ruin itself were a sleeping beast, listening to them. Their breath plumed white in front of their faces. Now and then, a gust of wind sliced through a gap in the ancient walls, keening like a lament. Ronald, who led with his bow at the ready, found a partial archway that seemed to lead below ground. The arch was made of the same black material, though dusted heavily with centuries of snow. Ice clung to it like a translucent shell. Beyond it, a slope descended into darkness. Garth produced a torch. With flint and steel, he managed to light it, though the flame sputtered in the frigid air. They ventured in, for shapes huddled around the faint light, the gloom pressing close. The air changed in quality. Inside, there was less wind, more stillness. The walls around them were slick with ice. Sam ran a glove over the stone, feeling grooves in the surface. The corridor sloped downward, and soon they found themselves in a half-collapsed hall, perhaps once a grand chamber. Broken columns of black stone rose from the floor, their tops shattered. The walls bore carvings that might have once told a story, but time and frost had ruined most details. Sam's eyes stung as he tried to read the battered glyphs. They were Valyrian in style, swirling serpents, stylized dragons, but also symbols he did not recognize. Jarek muttered, "Feels like a tomb." Sam carefully moved the torch closer to a portion of the carvings that were less eroded. He could make out the shape of a volcano, or perhaps a mountain spouting flame, typical of Valyrian iconography referencing the 14 flames. But this depiction included unfamiliar shapes of pine trees or tall, spindly evergreens. That was not typical Valyrian imagery. Valyria was a land of fiery mountains, not northern forests. This was further evidence that some group of Valyrians had come here. Sam's heart thudded. Suddenly, Ronald, who had wandered to the other side of the chamber, called out, "Maester, over here." They hurried over. He stood near a collapsed portion of the wall that revealed a side passage. "Look," he pointed to the floor at his feet. There, half buried in ice, lay the remains of a body, at least the skeleton of one. Its bones were clad in scraps of black leather, mostly rotted away, with a broken sword at its side. From the shape of the hilt, Sam recognized something that might have once been Valyrian steel, though it was corroded now beyond normal measure. Maybe it wasn't steel. Possibly some other metal. The skeleton was not fresh, obviously. By the look of it, it had lain here for centuries or more. Garth crouched, trying to brush away some ice. "How could this remain undiscovered so long?" he muttered, rhetorical. "No one's been here, that's how." Sam kneeled, eyes wide. The skeleton's skull showed no obvious cracks, but the ribs looked odd, as if warped. Perhaps it was just the passing of time. His gaze fixed on the hilt of the sword. The blade was half missing, snapped off. The crossguard was set with a small piece of obsidian, though chipped. Sam's pulse quickened. This was not the forging of common men. A swirl of wind hissed through the corridor, extinguishing the torch. Darkness clamped around them, Jarek cursed, fumbling with flint. Sam's breath came quick, and for a moment he imagined that skeleton rattling to life. "Steady," Garth said. He relit the torch. The wavering glow returned, sending shadows dancing across the black walls. The skeleton remained as it was, of course, but Sam had to steady himself all the same. They pressed deeper along the side passage, which twisted downward at a shallow angle. Ice crackled underfoot. In places, they had to crouch beneath fallen beams. Sam realized the fortress must extend further below ground, or perhaps it was built partly into a hillside. The architecture was reminiscent of Valyrian design. Smooth curves, fused stone. Yet everything was shattered, as if some cataclysm had struck. They emerged into a lower chamber, smaller and mostly intact. The walls here were carved with more swirling glyphs, and the floor was surprisingly free of debris, though encased in a sheen of ice. At the far end of the chamber, something glinted in the torchlight. They approached slowly. It was an altar-like structure, a slab of black stone rising to waist height, partially covered by frost. Sam used a gloved hand to brush the frost away. Beneath, they saw a circular depression, ringed by carved runes. Sam recognized a few as variants of High Valyrian characters, but the rest baffled him. At the center lay a spherical chunk of obsidian, about the size of a man's head, but carved with grooves. Sam's breath caught in his throat. He gently lifted it. It was surprisingly heavy. The surface was polished to a sheen, making it reflect the torchlight in swirling patterns. Garth frowned. "What is that for?" Sam swallowed. "I'm not entirely sure." The battered text had mentioned forging hearts of obsidian, or forging lumps of black glass that pulsed like hearts. The sphere was cold and unyielding, of course. No beating heart. Yet as Sam held it, he felt a strange resonance, perhaps only a trick of his imagination. Ronald said, "Take it if you want. I just want to get out of this place. Feels cursed." Jarek grunted agreement. "Are we done here, Sam?" Sam hesitated, torn. He wanted to search every corner of this ruin, to uncover a trove of records, proof that these exiled Valyrians had discovered advanced forging or secrets about the others. But a deeper fear nibbled at him. The cold was intense. They had limited food, and more storms might be coming. Staying too long could be suicidal. "Let's see if there's a library or a smaller room with inscriptions," Sam said, voice trembling with the knowledge that he was pushing their luck. "Then we'll head back." They discovered a narrow corridor leading off to the side. It ended in a collapsed doorway that was partially blocked by rubble. Garth and Jarek heaved some stones aside until they made a space wide enough to slip through. Beyond was a small chamber with shelves carved into the walls, though most had collapsed. Sam's heart leapt. This might be the library or record room. He rushed forward, torch raised, scanning the corners. Much was lost. Whatever had been stored here had rotted away, especially if it had been parchments. But in one corner, they found a niche that contained something that looked like tablets of black stone. Carefully, Sam pulled one out. The black surface was etched with faint lines of silver in a script he had never seen. This was not typical Valyrian writing, perhaps a more ancient variant, or perhaps something else. He rummaged further and found a fragment of a clay tablet in the back, with symbols painted in red and gold, though it was chipped. Tucked behind it was a small cylinder of metal, sealed with wax. Sam pried it open, expecting dust, but inside, unbelievably, was a roll of what looked like hammered gold leaf, etched with lines. The gold leaf was so delicate that Sam's breath caught in his throat. He dared not remove it fully for fear of disintegration. But from what he could see, the lines were a mixture of Valyrian glyphs and stylized runes. Some older, unknown script coiled among them. This was a priceless artifact of knowledge. He carefully tucked the cylinder into his satchel. "We have to preserve this," he murmured. "We'll need to study it at the Citadel. This might confirm everything." Ronald shifted anxiously. "This place is giving me the creeps. That wind." The corridor outside moaned. Snow dust hissed through some crack in the wall. Sam nodded, chest tight. "Yes, let's go. We have enough." He wished he could spend weeks here, but it was madness. The ruin was half collapsed and they lacked the resources. One day, perhaps, an organized expedition with more men and supplies could come. For now, they had found the evidence. A hidden Valyrian outpost, an unimaginable relic. They had to bring news of it home. They made their way back, carefully retracing their steps. At the upper chamber with the broken columns, they discovered fresh drifts of snow had blown in. The entire place felt colder, as if the fortress had exhaled some final breath. Sam felt an eerie sense that something watched them from the corners of the gloom. But it was only his fear, he told himself. There was no sign of wights or white walkers. So far. Outside, the daylight was dim behind heavy clouds. Snow fell thickly, swirling in gusts. They trudged through the ruins' courtyard, if that's what it had been, passing more collapsed walls. Everywhere Sam looked, he saw black stone fused with obsidian. Some had a glossy sheen, as if the stone had been melted at a great heat. Indeed, this was the hallmark of Valyrian sorcery, rumored to combine spells with intense flame. How had they kept such flames alive in the north? Perhaps they had used magic or found a volcanic vent. The battered text had hinted at a black fire forging. Could it have been some geothermal phenomenon? Sam's mind buzzed with questions. But with each step, the wind strengthened. Soon the snow became a howling curtain. Ronald cursed. "Blizzard's coming." He pointed to the sky, dark as slate. They quickened their pace, pushing toward where they had left the donkey and horse. Visibility dropped to mere yards. Sam's eyelashes crusted with frost. Garth led the way, calling out over the wind. Then something loomed out of the white swirl. A shape, dark and massive. At first, Sam thought it was a boulder or a chunk of collapsed wall. But it moved, a monstrous shadow. Garth froze. Ronald swiftly raised his bow, though the swirling snow made aim uncertain. The shape drew closer, resolving into the hulking form of a polar bear, its fur an unearthly pale color, eyes glinting with an eerie blue. Sam's heart seized. White bear, or some half-starved beast prowling in the storm. Jarek muttered a curse, brandishing his spear. 7 hells. The bear roared, a thunderous sound that rattled the air. His breath steamed. Sam glimpsed black gums and teeth slick with drool. They had no choice. The bear charged. Ronald's arrow flew wide, lost in the white. The beast smashed into them with terrifying force. Garth was knocked to the ground, his torch guttering out, while Jarek thrust his spear, which skittered off the bear's thick hide. Sam scrambled backward, fumbling for his short sword. The wind whipped tears from his eyes. Ronald let loose another arrow, this time striking the bear in the flank. The beast roared again, but seemed only enraged, not slowed. It swiped a huge paw, catching Jarek in the side. Jarek gasped and fell to his knees, blood staining the snow. Sam cried out, voice lost in the wind. He lunged, sword trembling in his grip. The beast reared up, towering above him. Sam slashed wildly, feeling the blade catch on thick fur. The bear jerked back, then snarled, swinging at Sam. He barely stumbled aside, the paw scraping his cloak. Garth regained his feet, drawing his broadsword. He and Sam tried to circle the beast, distracting it, while Ronald loosed another arrow. This one buried itself in the bear's chest. The beast roared again, but unbelievably it kept fighting, either too enraged or too starved to flee. It lunged at Garth, forcing him to roll aside. Sam mustered his courage and stabbed for its side, but the sword barely penetrated. The bear's hide was thick, muscle coiled beneath. Jarek, though wounded, managed to rise and jab his spear again, aiming for the beast's throat. This time, the spear sank in. The bear's roar turned into a gargling choke, and it twisted, snapping the spear's shaft. Blood sprayed across the snow, blackish in the storm's half-light. Ronald fired another arrow into the beast's neck. Finally, with a last spasm, the bear collapsed onto the snow, its breath rattling away. For a moment, no one spoke. The wind howled. Sam panted, heart hammering in his chest. Then he saw Jarek slump, blood seeping from his torn side. He rushed over, dropping to his knees. "Gods!" Sam choked. "Hang on," Jarek hissed in pain. Garth found bandages in his pack, and Sam helped press them against the wound. The bear's claws had raked him deep, though. If they couldn't stop the bleeding, Jarek would die. And even if they did, infection was likely in these conditions. "Carry him," Ronald gasped. "We have to get to the donkey. Shelter. Something." Sam nodded, fear and guilt colliding in his chest. He should never have led them here. "Yes, come on." They half-dragged Jarek, stepping around the massive corpse of the bear. The wind tore at them, blowing stinging snow into their faces. Garth carried the torch unlit now. They had to rely on faint daylight and memory to find their path. Eventually, through the swirling haze, Sam saw the shapes of the donkey and horse, both braying in terror. Their footprints were half buried in fresh drifts. "We need to find shelter," Sam said, voice trembling. "Or Jarek won't survive." Ronald looked around wildly. There was only the black ruin, the howling coast, endless ice. He pointed back at the fortress. "We can't go out in this storm. We'd freeze." Sam realized with horror that the only option was to return to the Black Fortress and wait out the blizzard in some enclosed chamber. A swirl of dread coiled in his stomach. They would have to spend the night in that ghostly place. But there was no alternative. "We have to," Sam said. "Help me get the animals inside, if we can." It was a grueling process. The donkey balked, the horse shied, but eventually they led them into a semi-sheltered courtyard near the collapsed remains of a gate. Sam, Garth, and Ronald set up a makeshift campsite in an alcove with a partial roof overhead. Snow still swirled in, but at least the wind was less direct. They spread out bedrolls, started a small fire with the last of their kindling, and tried to warm Jarek. Sam cut away the shredded cloth from Jarek's side. The wounds were deep. Sam poured the last of his strong liquor over them in lieu of a proper antiseptic, ignoring Jarek's cries of pain. Then he pressed a poultice of dried herbs he had in his pack, binding it tightly. He prayed to the seven, half remembering the words. He wanted to beg the old gods too, or any gods that would listen. The howling storm outside felt like a cosmic force of indifference. He glanced at the battered volume in his satchel, as if it held answers. But it was only silent. Jarek drifted in and out of consciousness, his skin pale. Garth, face lined with worry, fed him sips of water. Ronald paced, hugging himself for warmth, eyeing the swirl of snow that sometimes gusted through the broken gate. "If we don't freeze, maybe the whites will come. Or another bear." Sam tried to sound reassuring, though he wasn't sure he believed his own words. "We'll stand watch. This fortress is mostly enclosed. If we keep the fire going, the animals near, hopefully no beast or white will bother us." He forcibly pushed away the memory of that unearthly shriek from the last time he encountered a white in the wilderness. As darkness fell, the wind continued to rage, a ceaseless roar. They had precious little fuel, so they rationed the fire, letting it burn low. The donkey and horse huddled close, exhaling wisps of steam, occasionally stamping their hooves in discomfort. Sam's gloved hands trembled from the cold. He realized with sudden bitterness that the ancient Valyrians here might have had access to some geothermal warmth, or used their sorcery to keep out the cold. Now it was just a broken husk, offering meager shelter at best. They set a rotation for watch. Sam tried to sleep, but the cold stabbed him awake whenever he drifted off. Finally, it was his turn to keep watch. He sat there, listening to the storm's feral howl, peering into the gloom. One side of the courtyard opened into deeper corridors. The flicker of the dying fire cast shifting shadows on the black walls. He stared at those walls, thinking of the half-seen glyphs, the hidden library. Images chased each other through his mind. He imagined men and women with Valyrian features, silver hair, maybe working forges that glowed with a black flame, forging lumps of dragonglass into weapons or arcs of twisted artistry. He could almost hear their voices chanting in a language older than anything he knew. Then he imagined the arrival of an enemy, white shadows creeping in from the swirling snows, striking with cold magic. The fortress might have fallen to that unstoppable threat. Or perhaps internal strife had undone them. The battered text gave no conclusive answer. He also recalled the line, "Then the Watchers of Ice came and the old horrors awakened. But by the black fire, the Watchers were stayed. For a time, perhaps they held them at bay. But not forever. Even Valyrian magic could fail." Sam swallowed, a lump in his throat. So much knowledge lost, scattered to the winds. Now here they were, thousands of years later, huddling in the remains like beggars. A faint crunch of snow startled him. He raised his eyes, peering into the gloom beyond the courtyard. For a moment, he saw nothing but shifting darkness. Then something moved again, a shape small and quick. Sam tensed, fumbling for his short sword. The donkey snorted. He was on the verge of calling out to Ronald or Garth when the shape emerged into a patch of faint firelight. It was a small silhouette, perhaps the size of a child. Sam's heart froze. Could it be a wight? The silhouette seemed crouched, moving on two legs. Then he heard a hiss, a half-human voice. "Spare me! Spare me!" Sam forced air into his lungs. Who goes?" he called softly, trying not to wake Jarek. Another shuffle. Then the shape stepped forward, a figure clad in ragged furs. A wildling child? No, older than a child, but stunted. Possibly a dwarf or some starved wretch. The figure's face was half hidden by a hood. Sam saw a flash of pale cheeks, dark eyes. "Spare me," the figure repeated in accented common tongue, raspy. "I mean no harm." Sam realized the stranger must have slipped in through some corridor. "We won't harm you," he managed, though he kept a hand on his sword. "Come closer to the fire if you're cold." At his words, Ronald and Garth roused. Ronald seized his bow, eyes wide. Garth rose, hand on his sword. The figure shrank back slightly, as if cornered. Sam lifted a hand to calm them. "It's all right. It's one person, unarmed, I think." The figure trembled, shuffling closer. By the glow of the embers, Sam saw a face that might be female, lined with grime and scars. Her eyes flicked from Ronald's bow to Sam. She repeated, No harm. I was searching." Her accent was thick, words clipped. She coughed. "Searching for what?" Ronald growled. She gestured vaguely at the fortress walls. "Old things. Dark glass. I hide from the storms." Her eyes darted to the donkey. Sam realized she might be half-starved, drawn by the scent of potential food or the warmth of their fire. He tried to soften his voice. "We can share some scraps of food, if you tell us who you are." "I called Teria," she managed, hugging her furs around her. She was indeed short, or perhaps bowed by malnourishment. Her hair was in wild tangles. She eyed them warily, as if expecting violence any moment. Ronald lowered his bow a fraction. "A lone wildling out here? You must be mad." She gave a rasping laugh, something like a sob. "Yes, mad, but I watch the black stones. They speak in the storm." Sam's scalp prickled. "You've been here before?" She nodded. Sometimes, I see dead men come. Once I saw a man with hair like silver. He wore black robes and carried a shining staff." Sam frowned. It sounded like a half-crazed story, or maybe a vision from the swirling snow. "Are you certain?" She shrugged helplessly. Garth gestured her toward the fire. Teria crept forward, extending her hands to the flickering embers. She winced at the heat, as if her hands were numb. "I smell bear's blood," she said softly, glancing around. Then her eyes fell on Jarek, who lay unmoving near the wall. "Wounded?" Sam nodded, worry tightening his chest. "He needs rest and warmth. We're stuck here until the storm passes." She lowered her eyes. "This place, not safe. Ghosts. Worse than ghosts. But I know a better chamber below with less wind." Ronald shot Sam a skeptical look. "It could be a trap." Sam hesitated, but Teria didn't look like a cunning assassin. She looked like a desperate woman. "And if there really was a safer spot, we can check it," Sam said. If it's better, we move Jarek. We'll all freeze here if the fire goes out. He gave Teria a measuring look. Show me. Ronald insisted on accompanying them. Arrow knocked. Teria led them through a side passage they had not fully explored, descending a slope into what seemed like a partially intact hallway. They passed a collapsed arch, then emerged into a chamber that was indeed more sheltered from the wind. The ceiling was stable, the floor covered in a layer of frost, but at least the walls blocked the storm's fiercest gusts. No collapsed beams or open gates. A corner had some scattered debris, broken furniture or stones. With a bit of searching, Sam saw it could be a workable campsite. Teria said, "The stone keeps the cold away a little. Not much, but more than outside." Ronald sniffed the air. Suspicious. Smells musty, but no rotting corpses. They returned for Garth and Jarek. Carefully, they hoisted the wounded man onto the horse's back. Jarek moaned faintly. The donkey followed. They guided them down the slope to the new chamber, setting up the bedroll again. Sam checked Jarek's bandages. The bleeding had slowed, though his skin was still clammy, pulse weak. Sam feared a fever might set in soon. In that more protected space, they managed to coax a small fire from the last scraps of wood. Teria hovered nearby, watching them. When Sam offered her some dried fish, she ate it ravenously, like an animal that had not eaten in days. Garth asked her questions, but she answered vaguely, speaking of wandering alone after her kin had died. The ships at Hardhome left. Then the whites came. I fled. They say the crows from the wall might help or might kill me, so I hide. Ronald shook his head. What about this fortress? You say you come here often? She nodded, hugging her knees. Sometimes. The black stone calls to me in dreams. Not many dare come. I find shelter. Sometimes I see visions. Her eyes drifted to Sam. You come from the south, yes? The black stone calls you too. Sam felt uneasy. I'm a scholar. This ruin is very old. I want to learn its secrets. She studied him for a moment. Secrets. Yes. The ghosts below speak. They speak of forging hearts. She tapped her chest. Not hearts of flesh, hearts of stone. The Watchers fear them. A chill crept over Sam. This woman, half-crazed or not, seemed to echo the battered text's references. You've seen something? She shrugged. Not truly. I dream. The black stone hums. Sometimes I hear chanting. She gave an odd half-laugh, half-sob. Maybe it's just madness. Sam had no easy reply. The fortress was steeped in ancient sorcery. Perhaps the ghosts of the past lingered. Or perhaps it was just the wind. He forced himself to calm. We just need to ride out the storm, he said. Then we'll head back to Eastwatch if we can. I'll see Jarek gets a proper healer. Teria glanced at Jarek's pale face. She rose, crossing to him, and rummaged in her furs. She pulled out a small pouch of dried roots. This might help, she murmured. Make a tea. Bitter, but it fights bad spirits in the blood. Sam recognized some of the root as pale greenish lumps he had seen wildlings use. He knew it had some medicinal properties, though also risks, but they were desperate. Thank you, he said quietly. He prepared a small pot of melted snow, added the roots, letting them steep in the meager flame. Soon a pungent odor filled the chamber. He spooned some between Jarek's lips. The wounded man grimaced, but swallowed, drifting off again. After that, they took turns resting. Sam dozed fitfully, haunted by nightmares of forging obsidian hearts. He saw men chanting in a weird language circling a molten pit. Then the Watchers of Ice swept in, clad in armor of hoarfrost, their eyes blazing blue. Sam woke gasping. Garth was on watch, sword across his knees. The donkey braying softly in the corner. Teria had curled up near the embers, sleeping or feigning sleep. Ronald snored. Jarek lay still, but at least he was breathing. Sam rose quietly, stretching the stiffness from his muscles, and moved to the chamber entrance. There, he could see the corridor leading deeper into the fortress. The storm still howled outside, but here, in the gloom of the black stone, the wind was only a distant moan. He was aware of a deep curiosity tugging at him, urging him to explore further. It might be foolish, but perhaps he could just take a short look, see if there was anything else that might help Jarek or reveal more about the fortress. If Teria had found some secret stash of supplies or discovered a hidden corner with old relics, he turned to Garth. "I'm going to look around a bit more. I won't go far." Garth eyed him. "Is that wise? You'll get lost." "I'll mark my way," Sam said, showing a piece of chalk from his pack. "If I'm not back soon, come find me. But I just need to see what's here." Reluctantly, Garth nodded. "Stay safe, Sam." Sam lit a small oil lantern, rationing the last bit of their lamp oil. Then, quietly, he ventured into the corridor, leaving the chamber behind. The black stone walls glistened with moisture. There was an unnerving hush. He paused to scrawl a small chalk arrow on the wall, then proceeded slowly. In his hand, he held the battered volume in case he needed to compare glyphs. He came upon a larger hallway, lined with tall, arched openings. Inside them, there might have been storerooms once, but they were mostly empty now. A drift of snow had gathered in one corner from a hole in the ceiling. As he advanced, the fortress's architecture seemed to shift, the corridors more intact. At last, he turned a corner and nearly gasped. Before him stretched a hall with a vaulted ceiling, lined on both sides by massive carvings. Dragon-like shapes interwove with angular runes. On the floor, the mosaic, though cracked, depicted swirling patterns in black and dark green, reminiscent of swirling flames. Sam had never seen anything like it outside references to the greatest Valyrian temples. He approached one of the wall carvings, lantern trembling. It depicted a humanoid figure, tall and robed, with stylized flames swirling around them. The figure's arms reached upward, as if commanding the flames. Next to that figure was another shape, hard to decipher, maybe a monstrous form, winged or horned. Valyrian dragons were typically depicted in more recognizable forms. This was something more primal. Sam felt gooseflesh prickle on his arms. He tried to read the runes inscribed beneath, but they were in an archaic script. He recognized a word akin to blood repeated multiple times. He swallowed hard. This must have been the fortress's central hall, or maybe a ceremonial space. If he had more time, if he had a team of scholars, this place would be a revelation. But alone, it felt forbidding, as if 1,000 eyes stared at him from the carved walls. He pushed forward, passing under a collapsed archway at the far end. The hallway opened into another large chamber, this one ring-shaped with a pit in the center. Sam peered down and saw steps spiraling into darkness. A wave of cold air wafted up, as if from the depths of the earth. He hesitated, heart thumping. This was madness. He should return to Garth. But something in him insisted on taking just a quick look. Perhaps there was a lower forge or library. Maybe he could glean a final piece of the puzzle that would help the realm. Lantern in hand, he descended the steps. The black stone walls curved around him, the steps slick with ice in places. He nearly slipped. He scrawled a chalk arrow on the wall to mark his path. The air smelled stale with an undercurrent of old minerals. After about 30 steps, he emerged into a lower corridor. The architecture was simpler here, narrow halls that snaked left and right. Sam's footsteps echoed faintly. He tried to turn left, following a slight downward slope. Soon, he came to a chamber where the floor was not stone, but black glass that shimmered under the lantern light. Sam's breath caught. The obsidian was so smooth it was like a mirror. Cautiously, he stepped out onto it. A faint reflection of his lantern danced below him. The walls here were carved with more runes, though smaller and denser. This must have been a place of significance, somewhere they performed the forging or the darkest of rituals. In the center of the chamber stood a pedestal about waist-high, made of the same black stone. On it rested a chunk of dull metal, shaped like a short cylinder, about the size of a man's forearm. Sam approached, brow furrowed. Why leave something like that here? He reached out, gingerly touching the surface. It was cold, heavier than expected when he lifted it. The metal had an odd sheen, almost violet in certain angles of lantern light. Possibly an alloy? Could it be the raw material for forging? He recalled references in the battered text about forging dragonglass with certain metal bindings. A sudden, soft noise behind him made him spin around. His lantern flickered. He saw nothing at first. Then, from a corner of the chamber, a shape detached itself from the darkness. Sam's heart lurched. It was Teria, the wildling woman, or so it appeared in the gloom. She moved quietly, her posture tense. "You followed me?" Sam asked, voice shaky. "Why?" She stared at the pedestal. "It calls. This place. I've been down here, too afraid to go on." She looked at Sam's hand, which held the metal cylinder. "That is more than metal." She reached out as if to touch it, but Sam instinctively pulled back. "How did you get here?" he demanded. "You said you only scavenge above." She shrugged, eyes flickering in the lantern glow. "Sometimes I roam. I heard your footsteps." Her voice was monotone, as if she was in a trance. Sam felt uneasy. "We should return. Jarek needs help." She took a step closer. "Wait, there's something else. Another chamber. Scared me, but maybe you can see." Her eyes gleamed. "It might help you." Sam's mouth felt dry. Why was she so insistent? Still, curiosity burned in him. He nodded, swallowing. "All right, lead the way." She took the lantern from him gently, turning to a side passage. Sam followed, gripping the metal cylinder under his arm. The corridor was narrow, the walls shining with condensation. The swirling runes seemed to follow them, etched deep into the black stone. After a short distance, Teria stopped before a door made of iron, heavily rusted but still intact. Strange that it had not disintegrated entirely. "In there," she whispered, passing the lantern back to Sam. He approached the door, seeing that it was slightly ajar, a gap wide enough to slide through. With a trembling breath, Sam squeezed through, Teria following. On the other side was a small hexagonal chamber. The ceiling was low, forcing Sam to stoop. Teria was short enough to stand upright. The floor was coated in a thin layer of milky ice that crackled under their feet. At the chamber's center stood an odd arrangement. 6 obsidian columns forming a circle, each about waist-high. Runes covered their surfaces, and in the center of that circle lay a single black crystal, shaped almost like a heart, with ridges and edges that refracted the lantern's glow. Sam realized it was a piece of dragonglass, intricately carved to suggest veins and ventricles. It was larger than a man's fist, but not by much. Something about it made his skin crawl. He recalled the battered text, "The forging of hearts of obsidian." Teria's breathing was ragged. "They left it, or it left them. I touched it once. I saw visions. Terrible, wonderful, could not understand." Sam licked his lips, stepping closer. The black heart shimmered. A faint hum seemed to emanate from it, or perhaps that was just his pulse pounding in his ears. This was definitely a product of advanced craft, possibly magical. A hush filled the chamber, broken only by Sam's ragged breathing. Was this artifact the key to repelling the White Walkers? Or was it something darker, a relic of twisted Valyrian experiments? Sam felt a wave of hesitation. Touching it might be dangerous, but then his scholarly drive overcame him. Gently, he bent down, letting his gloved hand hover above the carved heart. He expected heat or some tangible energy. He felt only cold. Slowly, he wrapped his hand around it and lifted it from the columns. A jolt of something like a flash in his mind made him stagger. Images burst unbidden. Swirling darkness, a swirl of ghostly shapes, pale figures rising from the snow, black flames dancing in a ring. He heard a voice chanting in a language he did not know. Then, just as swiftly, it was gone, leaving him trembling. "Sam," Teria asked softly, her eyes wide. He tried to speak. I saw," but he couldn't find the words. Instead, he placed the heart gingerly in a pouch at his belt, determined that this was too important to leave behind. If it contained knowledge or power, the Citadel or perhaps Bran the Three-Eyed Raven, if he was still beyond the wall, might glean something from it. He turned to Teria. "We must go," he rasped, every hair on his body standing on end. "It's dangerous here." She gazed at him with a curious mixture of fear and reverence. "You are braver than I." Sam nearly laughed at the absurdity. He'd never considered himself brave, but they had tarried too long already. He could almost feel the fortress stirring, as if offended by their trespass. "Come on," he said, voice tight. They retraced their steps. The corridor felt endless. Sam's mind whirled with the artifact's haunting images, half lost in a swirl of confusion. When they finally climbed the spiral steps back to the upper levels, Sam felt a rush of relief. The corridor leading to the campsite seemed like a sanctuary. He half ran the last stretch with Teria close behind until they emerged in the chamber. Ronald and Garth looked up, startled. Jarek was moaning again, possibly running a fever. The donkey paced nervously. The wind had subsided slightly, but was still howling outside. "Seven hells, Sam," Garth scolded. "Did you get lost?" "I found some things," Sam said breathlessly. Teria slipped into a corner, silent. Sam crouched beside Jarek, pressing a hand to his brow. The man was burning up. Sam tried tea. Coaxed more root tea down his throat. Ronald took the lantern from Sam, frowning. "Any day now, we need to get out of here," Ronald said. "Blizzard or not." Sam nodded. "I know." They had found the evidence they needed, no doubt about it. This fortress was a hidden Valyrian outpost, half buried in centuries of ice. They had come searching for secrets of Dragonglass, and indeed they had discovered them. But the cost was high. Jarek might die, and the rest of them were far from safety. That night was a test of endurance. Jarek's fever spiked, and he raved in delirium. Teria provided more herbs, which seemed to help bring the fever down slightly, but his wound might well be infected. The storm raged on. Sometime in the darkest hours, Sam awoke to the sound of a faint chanting. He sat up, heart pounding, certain he heard voices. But the only other person awake was Garth, dozing by the fire. Could it be the wind in the corridors? Or the fortress's ghosts? Sam huddled deeper into his furs, clinging to rational thought. By dawn, the blizzard began to ease. Light filtered in through the fortress's cracks. They decided they had to attempt to leave, or Jarek would never survive. Teria insisted on coming with them, claiming she had nowhere else. Ronald remained suspicious, but Sam knew they couldn't just leave her here. Besides, she might be useful if they encountered more wildlings. They packed up, blanketing Jarek as best they could. With Garth's help, Sam hoisted him onto the horse. The donkey carried some supplies. Then they led the animals out through the remains of the fortress gate. Outside, a white expanse greeted them. Snowdrifts piled high, the sky a gray pall, but the storm's fury was gone. It was bitterly cold, the wind like knives. Sam felt the black fortress looming behind them, a silent witness to a hidden chapter of Valyria's history. He shuddered, thinking of the things that might still lie buried below. They trudged westward, trying to retrace their route. The going was slow, the snow deep, and every jolt made Jarek groan. Teria helped hold him in the saddle, whispering strange lullabies. Ronald led the way, scanning the horizon. Garth trudged behind, sword on his hip, face set with grim determination. Sam brought up the rear, staff in hand, that black metal cylinder strapped to his belt next to the carved obsidian heart. Both weighed on him, not just physically but in his mind, as if carrying secrets that might either save the realm or doom it. They battled through a labyrinth of icy gullies, slipping more than once. The donkey nearly toppled into a hidden crevasse, but Garth yanked the rope in time. Their progress was pitiful, but they pressed on, determined to reach Eastwatch. Finally, after what felt like days, and might have been two, they glimpsed the dark line of the wall in the distance. Sam nearly wept with relief, but Jarek's condition had worsened, his face ashen. Teria kept him conscious, pressing more tea to his lips. When at last they stumbled through Eastwatch's gates, it was like returning from the grave. Brothers of the Watch rushed to help, carrying Jarek to the infirmary. Sam practically collapsed, knees shaking. The battered volume, the obsidian relic, the cylinder of strange metal. He had them all, but at what cost? Dolorous Ed arrived, his expression grim. "You look like you've gone to hell and back, Tarly." He gazed at the nearly unconscious Jarek, concern evident. "I'll fetch the maester for him." "Oh wait, that's you. I guess I'll fetch the wise women. We'll do what we can." Sam nodded, voice cracking. "Yes, please hurry." They settled Jarek in a straw-stuffed pallet, stoked a fire, and forced hot broth down him. Sam hovered anxiously, applying the healing knowledge he had gleaned at the Citadel. Garth and Ronald recounted the story to Ed in halting words, about the Black Fortress, the monstrous bear, Terria's appearance. Ed, typically dour, seemed momentarily stunned. An ancient Valyrian stronghold in the north. Gods preserve us. Sam admitted all he had discovered. "It's real, Lord Commander," he said. "I saw the forging halls, or what remains of them, is bigger than I imagined. I have relics that prove it. Carved obsidian hearts, these strange metal alloys. Possibly records of forging techniques. We need to get these to the Citadel. The White Walkers." He took a steadying breath. "If they come again, this knowledge might be our only chance. The forging of special Dragonglass weapons or something more advanced. Our standard obsidian arrows might be child's play compared to what these exiles once made." Ed rubbed his face. "All right, Sam. I'll send ravens to Winterfell and another to the Citadel if we can. We'll see if we can muster a better-equipped expedition next spring, if the weather cooperates." Sam glanced at Teria, who lingered near the door, looking wary. "We have a guide," he said gently. "Someone who knows the region." Ed eyed her. "A wildling, is she?" "I'm no threat," Teria said quietly. "Just alone." Ed shrugged wearily. "We'll feed you if Sam vouches for you. We can always use an extra hand mending nets or cleaning up. But if you cause trouble, you'll wish you hadn't." Teria merely lowered her gaze. "I understand." Over the next days, Jarek hovered between life and death. Sam hardly slept, tending to him with Terria's root teas and the Citadel knowledge. His wounds were severe, but at last the fever broke. The man opened his eyes, weak as a kitten, but alive. Sam nearly wept in gratitude. Garth patted Sam's shoulder, relief etched on his weathered face. Meanwhile, a hush of awe settled over Eastwatch as word spread of the Black Fortress. Rangers asked Sam questions. The story spread quickly, and soon men were calling it Valyria's ghost in the north. Some laughed it off as a tall tale. Others believed, whispering that maybe the exiled dragonlords had once wielded unspeakable powers there. No one doubted that Sam believed in what he saw. Sam's priority was to preserve and study what relics he had brought. The battered volume, the black obsidian heart, the metal cylinder, and the gold leaf scroll in the wax cylinder. He wanted to be certain it was safe. Each day he tried deciphering the old glyphs. Most were beyond him, but he gleaned a faint idea. They referenced forging or merging the essence of life with obsidian, creating a conduit for black fire. It was reminiscent of the old Valyrian sorceries rumored to bind dragons, or shape living flame. Sam could not help but recall how Valyrians supposedly bound their dragons with blood magic. Could it be that these exiles attempted to replicate such feats with Dragonglass in the freezing north? If so, their success might have been partial, or they might have unleashed horrors. The battered volume gave incomplete hints. He yearned for more time in that ruin to find the missing pages, but he suspected many secrets had turned to dust. At least, now he had enough proof to urge the Citadel into action. With Ed's blessing, Sam penned a detailed report of their journey, sealed it with the Watch's sigil, and entrusted it to a raven bound for the Citadel. He could already imagine the Archmaster's reaction. Shock, doubt, maybe excitement, if they realized the significance of these discoveries, particularly the potential for forging advanced obsidian weapons. They might finally lend real support to the Watch's cause. Then again, Sam knew they might bury the knowledge in committees and skepticism. He prayed they would see reason. 3 weeks later, while Jarek was still convalescing, Sam carefully packed the relics into a crate lined with straw. He placed the obsidian heart inside a wooden box to protect it from accidental damage, and the metal cylinder next to it. The battered volume, now fully wrapped, went on top. He planned to sail back to Old Town, if a ship would risk the winter waters, to present his findings personally. Garth offered to accompany him to vouch for the story. Ronald decided to remain at Eastwatch, not eager to see the sea again so soon. Teria, uncertain, said she might come or might stay. She was still uneasy around crowds. Sam didn't press her. The day of departure arrived, bleak and overcast. Sam said his goodbyes to Ed and the other brothers. He embraced Jarek gently, who was still too weak to travel. "Thank you," Jarek murmured. "You might have saved us all with what you found." "I hope so," Sam said, voice thick with emotion. "The realm needs every advantage it can get." A battered cog, much like the one that brought him months earlier, waited at the harbor. The captain took Sam's coin, promising to deliver him to Old Town. Sam said farewell to Eastwatch, swallowing a lump in his throat. Would he ever return? Possibly, if the knowledge they found demanded further exploration. But for now, his job was to share the truth. As the ship set sail, Sam stood by the railing, the crate of relics at his feet. He looked back at the distant line of the wall, and beyond it, hidden by the curvature of the coast, lay the Black Fortress, a secret older than any living memory, linking the legacy of Valyria with the creeping shadows of the north. He wondered if the ruins still kept watch, waiting for the day when the Watchers of Ice returned. Perhaps the forging of those obsidian hearts had been a final attempt to hold back the tide. He felt a mingled awe and dread. They had proven it existed, but that was only the beginning. The deeper question was, what had those exiles truly done? Had they tapped into a power too dangerous to wield? Or had they discovered a weapon that could save the living from the undead? The swirling storms of the future might test that knowledge in ways Sam could hardly imagine. Garth joined him at the railing, squinting at the horizon. "Fate is a strange thing," he said gruffly. "We left searching for some lost history, and we found a fortress that no maester believed could exist. I can't help but wonder how it all ended for those people who built it." Sam nodded, exhaling a steamy breath into the cold air. "Perhaps we'll never know the full truth, but we know enough to realize that the fight against the others has deeper roots than we guessed. There might be hope in that." Garth grunted, unconvinced. Then he quietly said, "And if it's not hope, maybe it's a warning." Sam let that sink in. The gulls wheeled overhead, the wind tugged at the sails. Somewhere out there, the power of the old Valyrian freehold lingered in black stone, fused with obsidian. Sam closed his eyes, remembering the shimmering heart in his hand, the flash of visions. Was it a tool or a curse? The battered volume had no easy answers. He pulled his cloak tighter and watched the northern coastline recede. He could only do what he did best: gather knowledge, preserve it, share it with those who could put it to use. Should the day come when winter roared again with the wail of white walkers, perhaps the secrets gleaned from that hidden colony would tip the balance. Perhaps the forging of black glass hearts would light a spark strong enough to stand against the oldest cold. For now he had a task, a calling, a burden. The citadel awaited. Gilly awaited, though she remained in Horn Hill for the moment, as far as Sam knew. The rest of Westeros slumbered in ignorance. But knowledge was the sword he carried, heavier than any steel. He prayed, with each lap of the waves, that it would be enough. The ship creaked southward. Sam let the crate rest at his feet, feeling the gentle thrum of the obsidian heart through the wood. Maybe that was only his imagination, yet he couldn't shake the sense that it still pulsed faintly, as if alive. If the day came when winter's darkness fell again, that faint pulse might guide them, or it might reveal a deeper darkness. Sam Tarly didn't know. He only knew that he had followed a clue to the ends of the world, and the truths he found would change everything. He stared out to sea, letting the briny wind whip his cheeks, thinking of the hammered gold leaf etched with runes, thinking of the battered text that had led him here, thinking of the possible forging secrets that might spark new weapons or new horrors. The truth, like Dragonglass, was sharp and dangerous. But in a land bracing for the next winter's war, they needed every edge they could get. So he sailed, returning to the south, mind aflame with the unthinkable knowledge that somewhere in the far north lay a hidden legacy of Valyria, the black fortress that once turned aside the Watchers of Ice. One day soon, all of Westeros might learn of it, and perhaps in that knowledge lay a glimmer of salvation, or a storm of revelations that would shake the world. Until then, Sam Tarly held it close, heart pounding like the echo of a forge hammer in the depths of that ancient ruin, forging secrets from the darkness.